Ah,
Hello there. I'm Sean B.W. Parker for Empowering the Innocent. And today we are talking to Dr. Richard Gill, who is one of the foremost voices on the campaign to have Lucy Letby's case looked at again. I first came across Richard's work very early into Lucy's conviction, and he was one of those first serious voices to be out there pointing out some real problems, which many people watching this will be familiar with, and hopefully some not as well. And we're going to get into the weeds as we do, as objectively as we can. So, hi, Richard. Thanks for coming on.
hi, Sean. Good to be here.
Great stuff. Could you give us a little bit of a professional background to you?
Right. Well, okay. So, right now I'm a retired professor, and I'm originally from England. I have both English and Dutch nationality. My last job has been professor at the University of Leiden in the Netherlands. But I have both British and Dutch nationality, and I've been in Holland for 50 years. So my professional background is I grew up in England, in South England. I went to Cambridge. I was good at maths, good at physics, not so good at chemistry. I got sort of hooked on statistics when I was in Cambridge. I was finished in Cambridge with a kind of master's degree, but it was called a diploma in 1974. And at that time, I already had a Dutch girlfriend. And so I looked for a job in the Netherlands and I got one. And so I went to the Netherlands in 1974 and also got married, by the way. I'm still married to the same lady. And we have 3 children and 5 grandchildren. And my academic career went on from there in the Netherlands. I have worked at a research institute of the Dutch Science Foundation as a statistician, doing both mathematical research and applications. So I'm kind of more of a guy who proves theorems about why the mathematical methods work, which we use. That's really my primary career. But all through my 50 years career, I've been doing applied statistics, analyzing data, helping doctors, demographers, psychologists, anything, you name it, I've probably done it. And yeah.
So when it comes to the Lucy Letby case, who, for anybody that doesn't know, was convicted of the murder of 9 babies and attempted murder of the 9 more, and different sort of stats apply to all those things. I first heard you talking about the problems with the statistics about a year ago in mid 2004, I think. What was it that attracted to you about this case with her?
Right. So okay, now we go back to my my career again, actually, to explain that, because the key event was the Dutch nurse Lucia de Berg. Now, for most of my career, I have actually been working on statistical methods in medical research, cancer research, clinical trials, and so on and so forth, and I've contributed statistical methodology, which is used nowadays to save people's lives, because they have helped to get new treatments accepted through good statistical investigations. So I've always been involved in medical statistics, really. But in 2001, we first read in the Dutch newspapers that there was a nurse who was a person of interest in police investigations in the Netherlands at a children's hospital in The Hague, where there had been a peak of unexplained deaths, and they were associated with a nurse. So that was 2001, and the police investigations went pretty fast. The first trial was in 2003 at the lower court, and the Dutch nurse got convicted on the basis of a statistical calculation of probability. The number in court, which was named by a statistician, who actually was a friend and former colleague of mine, I should even say former friend and former colleague, he calculated 1 in 342 million. And this was allegedly the probability that so many bad events would happen in her shifts Lucia's shifts by chance. So there was a lot of, and this was like the only evidence. So the Dutch nurse Lucia was convicted on the basis of statistics. Now, there was a lot of controversy about that. People were unhappy about that. Of course, people who go to jail based on DNA evidence actually are also convicted on the ground of statistics, because there's probability calculations and statistical data in that too. So it's kind of not, shouldn't be impossible. But anyway, people were very shocked about this. You know, you can't do this. And nobody knew exactly what the calculation was which had been done, but the number was stunning. Now, the defense and the prosecution both appealed, and in 1 year later, the case was heard again at a higher court. And this time, the prosecution did not use any statistical evidence, at least not explicitly. Like, everybody agreed that there were all these things happening in Lucia's shifts, and she couldn't explain it. And you didn't need a statistician to see that it was weird. And that information infected the minds of doctors looking at particular cases, like particular collapse or particular death. And doctors actually sort of wrote in their report to the court, normally I would have thought that this event was natural, but since Lucia was there, and she was so often there when bad things happened, actually I find it suspicious. Now, that is medical doctors using intuitive statistics to determine their medical decision. You understand? It's a pollution of medical evidence with statistical ideas by amateurs. And the 1 in 342 million, which had been said before, it still rang in everybody's minds. Everybody knew it was kind of impossible that this same nurse was there every time these bad things happened. And she didn't have an explanation for it. She thought she was spooked. I mean, she said she thought she was spooked. Okay, now still I was not involved, but in 2005, the case went to the Dutch equivalent of the CCRC. We have one as well, for exactly the same reasons. It was installed after a succession of miscarriages of justice involving police not telling everything they knew, you know, and scientists being misunderstood, or the wrong scientists being used.
Wow.
Exactly the same things. I mean, the same things like every time, you could say. But we had a CCRC, and 2 whistleblowers turned up and started getting a lot of attention. And I suddenly realized, my God, we've been fooled, right? The judge said, Lucia is convicted, you know, for so many life sentences, blah, 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 full life terms for so many murders and so many. And the judge said in their summing up, she's convicted solely on the basis of irrefutable medical evidence. But this was actually essentially a lie, because if you looked at the evidence, it was actually statistical. There was like one murder which seemed to be proven using medical information, toxicology, a bit like the insulin cases in the Lucy Letby case. So it's just sort of one case where there seemed to be motive, opportunity, and medical proof, right?
Okay. So just to move
anyway, that, may I just finish?
Okay.
Sort of that led to me being obsessed by miscarriages of justice, and I spent the next 5 years working to help Lucia get out of jail, which succeeded. And that's why I got involved in the Lucy Letby case, because I built up more experience in several further cases of innocent nurses convicted of serial murder on the basis of bad evidence. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. You used the word in talking about Lucia, motive. And the thing that always occurred to me about Lucy Letby is, despite all of the online blood sport about the subject, nobody can come up with a motive. And that's a very human element to all this. So what's your opinion on
Yes.
motive about Lucy and Lucia, if you want?
Well, let me first mention what my opinion is about Lucia's motive. Lucia was convicted on the grounds of strange things she wrote in her diary.
Oh.
Right? This is just like Lucy Letby with the strange things she wrote on those post-it notes. Very strange things. Now, Lucia wrote strange things. She wrote a couple of times, or no, one particular time especially, that on that day, that one of her patients had died, who was very important to the case, that it was a murder. And like the only proof it was a murder was that she had written in her diary that that day she had given in to her a very wrong compulsion, her secret compulsion, which was very unprofessional and which she didn't dare tell anybody about.
Oh.
Now, do you know what her compulsion was, at least according to her?
Sure.
I mean, the judges said this was a compulsion to kill patients, right? So it was a confession. She admitted that she had this compulsion to kill people. She said in court, and a psychologist confirmed that this sounded extraordinarily plausible given her character, that she had she loved reading the tarot cards to patients like on a terminal cancer ward, right? Patients who are going to die. She struck up a relationship with some of them. You know, some you do, some you don't. And she found out that some of them really appreciated that she read the tarot cards for them.
Right, that's a dark secret.
And she had to do that in great secrecy because it was totally unprofessional.
Well,
right. This is like Lucy Letby's doing this exercise which you have when you've got a very troubled mind and you do this journaling and you write all the bad phrases going through your head. I mean, they're not even thoughts, they're words going through your head again and again and again. And it's not clear that they're things she thinks or she's just repeating things which people had said.
Yeah.
But people thought about her, right? You write them down and you write the other side, and she just did it. And it's therapy. It's self-therapy. Very, yeah. So that's the, because apart from, I mean, I would say Lucy Letby, there is absolutely no evidence at all of anything like a motive, nor, more importantly, anything like psychopathic mind.
Yes.
She didn't smash in little rabbits' heads when she was a child, unlike Charles Cullen, for instance, in America. I mean, she never did anything unkind to a person or an animal in her whole life, as far as we know. And she was always enthusiastic, conscientious, sometimes a bit too shy, you know. You can say all kinds of things about her and you can cast them as character defects, but they're just how she was. She was a complex young lady.
Okay. So the picture starts to come together from what everybody knows on the media and what you and I are speaking about now. And so lots of people, including myself, would say it looks like institutions working against the individual. The NHS, the Cheshire Police coming together behind people like Ravi Jayaram, who may or may not have a professional thing against Lucy Letby in order to underplay it massively. Is what I'm saying nonsense or possibly true? Should it be investigated at least?
Yeah, well, I think that's what's going on. And again, there's a similarity with the Lucia de Berck case, which is in the Lucia de Berck case, there was a chief pediatrician, a consultant pediatrician, who was basically the chief medical person in a children's hospital. And she was making mistakes. She had some psychiatric problems. She was working half time. She was, had burnout or something like that. People were very kind about her. She was a very good pediatrician, but she was paranoid and she was making mistakes, and she ran the police investigation. She was making mistakes. She picked up gossip from other nurses, which went up through especially through the ladies in the levels of the hierarchy in a big hospital. The nurses talked to the senior nurses and so on. There are a lot of women talking to one another, and rumors spread rapidly in a different way than they spread in other, through other parts. But so that woman was making mistakes, and she possibly didn't understand what she was doing, but she basically didn't have enough time and energy to carefully read the medical notes of babies or children rather, being transferred into her hospital. And so she made some wrong decisions. She possibly didn't know, but she didn't understand what was going on. And a very suitable scapegoat turned up when people started gossiping about that weird nurse who, allegedly had been a prostitute before becoming a nurse, and had these weird stories, and was somebody who stood out in the crowd, and like Lucy Letby, complained if she saw things that were wrong. I mean, she told older males off when she thought they were doing things wrong, which you don't do, but Lucia was somebody who did that, and I think Lucy did that not in a direct way, but in the proper, correct way through Datik's, reports. Now, okay, so we know that actually, I would cast Breary, if I may, as the bigger villain, and Jayaram more as a sidekick of Breary here.
Okay, who's that then? Explain.
Sorry?
Explain Mr. Breary to us.
Yeah, Dr. Breary, Dr. Stephen Breary. Now, he was, though also a pediatrician, he was the lead neonatologist in the hospital, in that neonatal intensive care unit. And he used to say that his hobby was neonatology, but he was a pediatrician, but he was, and he possibly had been sort of taught what a neonatologist needed to know. But anyway, now we understand that he heard junior doctors associating Lucy Letby with a succession of 3 deaths in June 2016. And calling her Nurse Death, right? I mean, there were 3 deaths in succession. Like everybody notices when there are 3 deaths in a row, when you normally have 3 a year, especially when you normally have 3 a year. So there were like 3 deaths in rapid succession. That was certainly unusual for that unit, and we now know why. That's another thing to talk about, I hope. But Breary got the idea that they were connected with Lucy Letby, and we know that from that moment on, he had an eye on her, and he compiled something in what he called his drawer of doom, where he actually sort of listed events which bothered him, where Lucy was present. Right? He suspected Lucy, and he started collecting events where she happened to be there, or not happened to be there, but she was there, and he felt they were, bad events which he didn't understand. Now, we can talk about whether these events should have been expected or not. We should do that as well. But anyway, at some point, Breary also managed to convince his roommate and sort of closest friend among the pediatricians. There were 7 pediatricians in the hospital, right? But they were mostly all over the hospital, and there were 2 ward rounds a week. So one of those pediatricians might have come by once every few weeks. They weren't very often there, and we know that they were not enthusiastic to be there when the younger doctors who were actually doing the work, together with the nurses who were obviously doing a lot of the work, when they had questions or problems or issues, they were hard to get called in to come and have a look and give their expert opinion. So what happened? Yeah, so at some point there's evolved something which later was called the Gang of Four, which was like four particular pediatricians, which were Breary and Jairam and two others, or Gibbs, we know the name of. He was approaching retirement. He was like the most senior person there, but he was taking it easy and close to retirement. And Jairam and Breary were the ones in command, being the lead pediatrician and the lead neonatologist, respectively. And there's a fourth whose name is not supposed to be known, so I won't say it. Okay. And later, Dr. Gibbs said proudly, well, actually, we were a gang of seven, you know, because there were like seven. And there was an obstetrician as well who was joined in as well. But so at some point, a group of pediatricians started trying to raise the issues which they had with management. And there were several meetings and emails and so on and so forth. And the thing was that again and again, they had nothing. All they had was a gut feeling and a list of events which you know, at the time had surprised, at the time were unexpected, and which seemed difficult to explain, perhaps. But I mean, in retrospect, we know they were all very easy to explain, but maybe not easy to explain by Breary and Jairam, you know. And anyway, you know, if you don't have enough nurses and there are not enough doctors on the ward either, and they're not, many of those babies needed level 3 care, which means one-on-one nursing. Many of those babies were so frail and so dangerously sick, I mean, with various big medical issues. They would normally, in any other hospital, have been in a level 3 hospital, neonatal ward, and they would be having one-on-one nursing, which means one nurse is responsible for that baby all the time. Of course, not the same nurse all the time, but day and night, you know, 24 hours, 24/7. And so you have, as was later determined, far too few nurses, doctors not being supervised enough by the consultants. It was a recipe for disaster, and babies of extreme acuity. So if you don't have enough nurses, you don't see when things are happening, you know, and if you don't have good enough neonatologists actually being there again often, you're also not going to understand what went on and not see things happening. So of course you will have unexpected events, and if you're not collecting enough information about the babies, you won't be able to explain them either, because you have not observed enough. And this all makes a lot of sense now. So yeah, where are we? Yeah, we get to the summer of 2016, where interesting things happened.
Okay.
So
yeah. Just before we get there, I want to drop the one thing in, which is I think I remember you saying some months ago. The deaths on the neonatal ward stopped after she stopped working there. How convenient it looked. That's because they stopped putting the very ill babies onto the ward. Is that correct?
Yes. Is that right? That's absolutely correct. Well, as far as I know. Oh, yes. So at 2006, in summer 2016, I think in June, management agreed that there was a problem because there had been a large number of deaths. And we'll talk about the number in a moment. It was like something like, in the last year, there had been maybe about 10 or something like that. All right. Now, normally there had been 3 a year. So in a year, there had been maybe 10. There are different ways to count them because some babies died soon after transfer out of the unit.
Yeah.
So you see some slightly different numbers. And Anyway, management agreed that there was, at that point, that there definitely was a problem, and they knew of the ongoing conflict between Lucy and the consultants, because the consultants were agitating all the time, have her taken off the ward, we suspect her. And the management was saying again and again, show us the evidence. And they had none. They had none. All they had was a spike in deaths, and she was often there. Now, and they did a number of investigations. They did some internal investigations, and they couldn't find anything linking Lucy to the deaths which had been, except that she had happened to be there some of the time. And she was working very, very long hours, and she was one of the most highly qualified nurses on the unit, despite her very young age, which is a scandal in itself, because they had been firing older nurses because they cost more money. Right, so the unit was seriously understaffed, with not experienced enough nurses, and with consultants who were hardly ever there, and with young doctors who really didn't know what to do, but were doing their best, obviously. Right, so the management did two things. They took Lucy Letby off the ward, and they degraded the unit to level 1, which meant that it could no longer accept babies of more than some certain amount of prematurity. There's level 1, level 2, and level 3, and these are defined in terms of birth weight, how premature they are. Look them up. But if you make, the unit was on paper was a level 2 unit, so it was allowed to take fairly serious, but not extremely serious babies. And it certainly, we now know, certainly had been taking on some babies who definitely, according to the rules, should have been at a level 3 neonatal unit, such as there are a number in Liverpool. In Liverpool, you have big universities, big hospitals, which are also teaching hospitals, which are associated with the universities in Liverpool, where a lot of medical research is done, and where they have state-of-the-art neonatal intensive care units. So some of those, okay. So the huge number of deaths stopped, obviously, because it went back to being a level 1 unit. The RCPCH was called in, Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health, which was the right thing to do, to call in an external body of experts, a group of experts, to figure out what was going on, because there was a spike and nobody seemed to have understood it. And the RCPCH wrote a report. They couldn't find out sort of what is the cause. We know they looked at the nurses, and they even looked at Lucy, but they didn't see anything there. They saw nothing there. They wrote a report which basically damns the running of that unit, and they recommended that it went back to level 1. I mean, they said it should have been a level 1 unit. And they said there should have been 2 consultant rounds a day, not 2 consultant rounds a week. And they complained about all kinds of things. And they said some of the events we don't understand, and maybe they should be, and they should be forensically investigated. Why forensically? That doesn't mean by police, but it means by skilled scientists. Forensically, because not enough. There was not enough data there. There was not, the records weren't full enough. Biological samples were not preserved.
Yeah.
At the time of the deaths, the investigations which should have been done were not done. They blamed the pediatricians, consultants for that. They had not done what they should have done. Namely, every time there was something unexpected, investigate it properly. Gordon Bennett. I mean, it's sort of obvious, right?
Okay.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we have to wrap up soon because of the nature of these beasts, right? So, just going to move us on to Lots of people watching will be saying she had a trial, they had an 18-month thing, da, 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 da. You're all just cranks and weirdos. What do you briefly say to those critics?
Yeah. Well, they're not cranks and weirdos. They're people who've gone into things.
No, they call us cranks and weirdos, me and you.
Look, yeah, okay, you can call me a crank and weirdo if you like.
I wouldn't, Richard.
I mean, I say some weird things from time to time. But, okay, she had a trial, and there have been 2 juries. She had one trial which lasted 10 months and another one which was pretty short. And the thing is, the jury was told a heap of lies and bullshit. I mean, I understand that the jurors convicted her for a number of the indictments. I mean, yeah, sort of for most of them. There were a few not guilties and there were a few undecided, and one of the undecided was sort of rerun. The jury was told lies. The prosecution experts told a heap of bullshit, sorry, if I may say. I don't know if that's a loud word to say. I mean, really, absolute idiocy. The lead prosecution expert, Dowie Evans, is quite simply a charlatan. And he's got a reputation for doing totally inadequate work as an expert witness in earlier trials. A top judge wrote to Judge Goss, warning Judge Goss not to use Dowie Evans because he's totally unreliable. Wow. And he will sort of, do what he's paid to do. Possibly out of good motives. But of course, he loves earning the money because he boasts about it. Paid for his daughter's horse and his son's Mercedes or whatever, and his bungalow. So he makes good money doing his work, and he sort of he kind of believes in himself, right? But he's basically a big fool, in my opinion. Wow. And if he doesn't like that, he can tell me, and we can talk about it. But yeah, so the jury was told a heap of bullshit, and they believed it. The judge was, unfortunately, I think it's completely obvious, absolutely biased. The judge was convinced by the bullshit too, let's put it that way. Yeah. If you look at his instructions to the jurors at the end of the trial, he spends a lot of time explaining to them why they have to convict Lucy Letby. He even does the job of the prosecutors, namely making deductions from little bits of evidence, putting them together and explaining why together this meant that you could see she was guilty. So he basically told the jurors what to do, and they did, because they were, I suppose, they'd heard 10 months, they'd been brainwashed for 10 months. Yeah. And the public was too, because all the newspapers wrote at length. And now, yeah, so that's one thing to say. And the other thing to say is that by now, enough serious and independent and relevantly trained experts have gone into the medical evidence and have totally shredded all the conclusions, which were all the prosecution allegations. Yeah. Right? 2 babies were probably actually killed by the doctors.
Exactly. Okay, Richard.
Exactly.
It's a bit of a ride, all this stuff. I would like us to come back to this for ETI after we know what the CCRC are doing with Lucy, because of course that's
going to be very interesting.
That's a whole other story to go for. But we got Dr. Richard Gill here, and we got Mr. John Sweeney, the journalist, and Phil Hammond from Private Eye, and David Davis MP in Parliament, Dr. Michael Norton at Empowering Innocence.
A bunch of crazy crackpots, yes.
Well, exactly. They're all absolutely crazy people out there doing, and it's all interesting that they do that. Thank you so much for your time, and let's come back to this after it's done and have a good rest of your day in Holland. Yes.
I would be delighted. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Bye-bye.